also, because usually my son is here monitoring the live stream, and it seems to be working now. He's here monitoring the live stream, so if anyone asks any questions, he can send them to me, or if anyone comes into the room, he can deal with it. However, because the clocks have changed, he fell asleep an hour ago. So I'm going solo. We'll see whether or not it all tumbles in a heap. But yeah, we've been doing these now for 2 years. So these talks for 2 years. So I'm sort of getting to the point where some topics are coming back, and teaching kids to be good sight readers is so important. And it's something that I've noticed that it doesn't matter whether a teacher claims that they teach sight reading from the beginning or whether they teach sight reading later, there's still good and bad sight readers among the mix. So there's just some thoughts about sight reading, and we'll see how we'll go. So I'll share screen. Okay, where is it? I'll share the whole screen because last time I did something and something funny happened. So which of these buttons do I press? I think it's this one. No, it's not. Yes, it is. But before I do that, actually, where's WK? Can I just make you a co-host so you can help me? And Maggie, can I make you a co-host as well? So if people come into the waiting room, they can be let in. And then since I don't have my extra helper, I didn't ask, I just made you co-host so you can reject my request if you don't want to be. Okay, has it come up correctly? Has it come up correctly? Or can you see all my slides? This is weird. Wait a second.
Perfect. I can see it perfectly.
Oh, you can? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. I can see all these extra slides down the bottom. Can you see all my slides or just the main one in the center?
All of them.
Don't want to see all of them then. Let me try again. What am I doing wrong? Maybe I just do it like this because I don't want all of that's better.
Okay, now only one.
Good. Okay. I just don't know what comes next, but I don't know what's going on with Zoom, so we'll leave it as this. Okay. So teaching students to become good sight readers. So I could ask the question to start with why teach sight reading? It's not like particularly in the performance grades, it's not even examined anymore. So there's a few reasons. And one is that it aids in learning new repertoire, and it enables our students and us to have fun at the instrument. It facilitates playing in ensemble, where being able to sight read opens so many doors in ensemble playing. And of course, it opens the door to accompanying roles or session musicians type roles. And then finally, it enables the exploration of all that music that's on your shelf, but you haven't got around to playing. That's my shelf there. And there's a fair bit in there that I haven't been able to get time to go through. And sight reading opens the door to anything that's on your shelf. It doesn't give you time to play the music that's on your shelf, but it's not going to do that anyway. Oh, I can do this. Now will it page down? Yes. So I just want to raise the question, is learning music from the book sight reading? Now, this is the sort of thing that happens in the Alfred's books and the Hal Leonard books, where almost from the first lesson they're given the notes on the page and they're told to read them. And I've heard teachers say, I teach sight reading at the beginning because I'm teaching them to read the notes. But I want to bring the thought into the ring that this is not sight reading. Learning a piece of music is just that. It's learning a piece of music. This is a very different skill to sight reading. Whether we're learning by reading or whether we're learning by ear, we are just learning the music. And when we learn a piece, that involves things like slowly and carefully decoding the notes or figuring out the notes to make sure we avoid errors. It involves working on the piece in sections. It involves analysing the technique we're using and contemplating, is it the ideal technique, and working on it and taking bits of the piece out to work on our technique. And it involves ensuring that we use correct fingering if applicable to the instrument. These things should be done slowly and carefully. Chrysler particularly said the faster the piece, the slower it should be practiced. So, and then when we get new pieces, whether they're for performance or an exam, we shouldn't sight read them first. And the reason for that is that if you sight read the piece and play errors into it, those errors form a neural pathway in the brain, and that neural pathway is always there. So even if you practice the errors out, the original neural pathway remains and sometimes can reoccur on stage or in an exam. So I really don't advocate for sight reading pieces that we are learning for the purpose of exams or performances. Oh, that didn't work. Try again. So if it's not learning a piece from the notes, what is sight reading? Well, sight reading is playing a piece from the beginning with the right rhythm and almost correct notes. So I say almost correct notes because the correct notes is great, but it's not the priority. The priority is keeping the pulse. Sight reading involves ignoring mistakes. We ignore them because in order to keep the rhythm and the pulse going. You can imagine if I was accompanying in church and we're playing a song and I'm playing away and then I make a mistake. Oh no, I'm going to go back to the beginning of the bar. The problem, of course, is that the singers are there a bar ahead. So now I'm a bar behind. So I think playing for a choir is excellent practice at sight reading. That's that particular skill of sight reading, where you can't go back and fix mistakes. You have to keep where the music would be had it started with the metronome, or if you're playing along with Sibelius. And in sight reading, rhythm trumps notes. And if that expression doesn't make sense, that refers to a card game. And in the card game, particular cards trump or beat other cards. So in sight reading, rhythm is the priority in the game. Now, but when we're learning a piece, it's the other way around. We want them to get the notes correct before we worry about the rhythm when we're learning a piece that we're going to learn as a piece. So the order between sight reading and learning pieces differs. And sight reading only occurs the first time you play the piece. Once you've played the piece 5 times, it's not sight reading anymore because now your short-term and long-term memory have got involved in the process. However, I'm not suggesting that practicing sight readings 5 times in a row is not useful. It is a very useful thing to do, but by the 5th time, it's no longer truly sight reading. Ooh, it's still happening. So before we sight read, what are the prerequisites? So there are some essential skills we need before we can even consider sight reading. And the most important one is quick note recognition. If our students are going F, A, C, E to find the note, then they're not ready to sight read. They need a stable technique. When we sight read, we take our eyes off our hands. And our focus is on that rhythm and getting the notes as correct as possible. So if our technique is not stable, the moment we stop focusing on it, it's going to go wrong. And you see that with violinists who pull the violin in front of them and stare straight at the music, or pianists, their fingers go flat. So before we're saying, hey, let's sight read, we want that technique to be nice and stable. We want them to have a sense of underlying pulse before we're asking them to sight read. We want them to be able to read rhythm accurately. And we also want them to be able to play pieces that are harder than the pieces we're trying to sight read. So a guide that I've always used is 2 grades above. So if I'm in grade 8 and I want to practice some sight reading, then hopefully I should be able to easily sight read the grade 6 pieces. And age is a prerequisite for sight reading, as in the cognitive development. So if we're putting a 4-year-old in for an exam, we can't expect a 4-year-old to be able to sight read like a 15-year-old who is in a different developmental stage. So I just wanted to focus on that a bit. I didn't realize I'd made a slide about it. So reading is an abstract concept. The concept that this shape on the page says is completely abstract. Now, according to Piaget, the psychologist, and he had a set of developmental stages, he felt that reading, as in language, becomes cognitively possible or possible at the point of the brain's development at around age 7. So if we're teaching children younger than 7 and we're pressuring them to sight read before they're cognitively ready, this can create anxiety and confusion. And something that I've come across many times is that young children will often get the right answer, but they don't understand. This happened to me very early on in my teaching journey. And this young little 6-year-old, she'd been learning from age 3, and I was teaching traditional method in those days. And she got every answer right. She always answered the notes correctly. And then when she was about 7, she turned to me, she said, the A on the page is the same as the A on the piano. Now, up until then, she'd always got the answers right. So I was there thinking, oh, she's reading. But she just had this aha moment. And so if we can't go, oh, this child's reading well just because they're getting the right answers. It may just be that they've actually memorized stuff, but they don't understand. So children, if they're at the right cognitive developmental age, will learn reading very quickly. And you see that when we're teaching to read English. They get to a certain age where it's struggle, and they hit that cognitive development where it just suddenly all clicks because the brain's ready for it. Now, Steiner, who started all the Steiner schools, and I know very little about him except this, that he suggested that the right age for reading language was when the adult teeth come through. And at the Steiner school near us, if they could read before they went to school, they were discouraged from reading until their teeth came in. And they do learn it very quickly at that point. And of course, those teeth usually come in around age 7. So Steiner and Piaget are in accord here. So just to get practical, step 1A, if we're going to build sight reading by step, in my opinion, the first step is to start by reading one note. One note sight reading, where we just give them a note and say, find this note on the instrument. Now, this one note sight reading really needs to be instantaneous. They really need to be able to see that note and recognize it like we recognize the alphabet. Oh, that's N. There's no, oh, what letter is that? There's no using every good boy deserves fruit. It's seeing the note and knowing straight away, this is A, this is B. Until they're at that point, it's only going to create anxiety to try and give them 2-note sight reading. So there's a few ways we can do 1-note sight reading. We can use flashcards to sight read just one note at a time. And we can ask the student to name the note after they've played it or sing it. This is excellent for simultaneous learning. And for those who are familiar with Paul Harris's work, that's the thing that undergirds his curriculum, is that learning should be simultaneous and linked, so that all the neural memories are all linked to each other. So they play it, they name it, they sing it, and all of a sudden they've made a whole heap of connections to that written symbol. Note cards can be used for games like Snap and Memory, for extra practice, for fast note recognition. And now realizing that maybe not every culture is familiar with these games. I'm not sure if they're common across all cultures, but Snap is where you're playing with 2 people or more and you put down a card, and if it matches the other person's card, you snap. This was how my kids learnt note reading. They got very quick at note reading because they were desperate to win the game of Snap. And their father was not very good at music reading, so they got very quickly better than him. And that makes it fun, and they're learning to instantaneously read. Memory is where you lie all the cards down and you turn them over and you try and find 2 that match. And if you find 2 that match, you get to keep them. So, and when I was playing these games with the kids, I would say, I'd say the name of the note as well. So it wouldn't just be, oh, snap. Oh, you snapped. Okay, what note did you snap? So that, again, we're bringing in how many ways can we relate to this note before we, while we're playing the game. So after we have mastered single note sight reading, this is when we can introduce rhythmless sight reading. So again, we're really trying to avoid multitasking. We're trying to master each skill before we add in the next step. So with rhythmless sight reading, it could just be a random set of 2 flashcards. You can shuffle the deck, put 2 cards up, and then 3 cards up, and then 4 cards up as they master doing this quickly. In rhythmless sight reading, like when we're learning a piece, note accuracy is essential. So we're trying to build, I said that rhythm trumps note accuracy, but we want note accuracy. It's not that we don't want it, but it's just that it's not going to be more important than getting the right rhythm at the end stage. I encourage students to say the name of the note before they play it. And I said, think about here, for those who maybe don't want to say, but I use this terminology, say and play. So F, then play F, so that they're, again, engaging multiple parts of the brain. So, and again, before adding rhythm to sight reading, rhythmless sight reading must be spot on. Because if it's not, then that makes the adding rhythm, again, we're multitasking and it's so much more difficult and other things will go wrong. So I just stopped to talk about flashcards. This is the deck of cards that I use for playing Snap. And you can see I just grabbed some out of the box to take the photo, and there's 2 E's there. And so in this particular deck of cards, there's 4 of each note. So you can play Snap, you can play Memory. There's, in the deck of cards, there's a whole heap of other games like Go Fish and things like that I never got into because I don't understand card games very well. So, and you'll notice about this set of cards that there's no clef. And so this means if we're learning viola, we can use these, we can play the game with these cards, or if we're just trying to learn C clef or tenor clef or alto, or if we're doing treble or bass, it makes no difference because we can use the same set of cards. And because they've got no clef, we can line them up in a line to create random sight reading melodies, and you can shuffle the deck and put them up and get a new sight reading melody each time. So I've put the web address here. I had to contact the lady and get it because I couldn't find them on a Google search, but they're called Melody Express, and they're from that website, modernsuccessfulparenting.com.au. And there's also parenting stuff on that webpage, but these cards have been invaluable with my students and taking the pressure out of note reading, because it's a game, you know, maybe they're picking a random card out of the deck to sight read or a random combination to sight read. So it's quite fun. And then the other set I use, I know there's lots of others, so these are just the 2 I use, is these Alfred sets. The Alfred sets have a clef on each note, so they can't be used for making a melody quite so easily. But they are good for single note sight reading. And the other good thing about this set is that it has all the things they need for grade 1 theory. I shouldn't say all the things, there's multiple curriculums, but a lot of my students have used these to practice their Italian terms and other signs and symbols as well. So that's just 2. Hal Leonard has a set which includes a set of rhythms that the students can work on as well. So then step 1, rhythm recognition. It's not necessary that these things are taught one after the other. They can be concurrent, that we're doing part of the lesson on rhythm, part of the lesson on notes. But I hope that I'm getting across the point that trying to do rhythm and notes simultaneously at first is a very hard task, particularly for a child. No, not just for a child. Multitasking is always hard when we haven't mastered the different tasks. So I put here the Big Bang Theory, and it's a bit of a joke that I have with students when they're struggling with rhythms, is that I draw the beat on the music, And I say the bigger the bang, the more likely you are to get the rhythm correct. So if they're not getting it correct on a small drum, maybe we'll get a bigger drum. So that's just a little bit of joke that I thought I'd throw in there. But at this point with rhythm recognition, percussion is best, whether it's body percussion like clapping, or whether it's off style instruments or Kodai style instruments, or even the Kodai rhythm words. Using the body to make rhythm separate from the notes is so beneficial. So we can use rhythm names to help develop a sense of beat, whether that's the ones Kodai use, the ta, titi, tafa tefa, or whether we use other rhythm names that we've made up. There's been some pandemic names that have been made up, or I have my own pin, staple, caterpillar, but whatever it is that you use to pick something that you use consistently, so that the child memorizes what is the beat division. And Kodai is very good in particular at dividing up the bar into its strong, weak beats, and they have a whole heap of suggested rhythm activities in their course for those who are interested. And as with, for those who are not familiar with Dale Crowe's, is well worth looking up his concept. So this idea that the whole body movement has been beneficial to rhythm development, going from gross motor movement to fine motor movement. And so using percussion, using whole body movement, using rhythm names, we want the student to master rhythm. The amount of rhythm they have to master before they start sight reading, that I guess that's a personal preference. When you start bringing, if they've mastered playing crotchets and quavers, maybe it's time that they can start doing some basic sight reading. If their note recognition is mastered already, and that will be a bit individual. No, I was not talking. I just talked about something because I should have read the whole sentence before I started rambling. That once they have mastered some rhythms, it's really beneficial to get one part of the body to control the pulse while the other part of the body controls the rhythm, to just get this strong sense of beat division. And of course, this is going to be helpful in the future when they're maybe tapping their foot while they try and figure the rhythm while they're sight reading. There is absolutely no benefit in pushing a student to combine rhythm and notation elements until they're each mastered. I know sometimes we feel pressured to do that because they're ready for grade 1 except for the sight reading, so we push them to do it. They get anxiety, and that's the part of the exam that they lose their marks on. We're so lucky now that we have the option of doing a performance grade. If this student's not ready to do rhythm, the sight reading yet, that's okay, because they can do the performance grade. It's not that they're not working on it. So just to sidestep and go, is there a way we can teach our pieces that will promote sight reading? Well, one way is to use say and play, to name and sing the pitch. Singing is better than naming, if it can be possible, like sing the name. I don't have my slaves here to tell me what an A is, but A, if they're singing it before they play it and they're singing at the right pitch, then they're actually that's going to help them with their strong pitch awareness, and they can develop perfect pitch that way. So if note recognition is fast when they're learning their piece using say and play, that's a good indicator. They're almost ready for sight reading. At least this part is ready for sight reading. Also, this say and play or sing and play can help develop audiation, which someone brought up in the forum, and I didn't really spend a lot of time on it because I think sight singing is sight reading as well, but it's so much more involved because you're making your instrument is yourself. So there's an extra level of hardness that's beyond my experience with sight singing. But audiation is where you can hear what you see, and you sort of hear it in your imaginary ear. And so if they're looking at the music and before they've played it, they can actually already hear it in their imagination. That makes it so much easier to play. So this is where this say and play or sing and play is quite advantageous. So you can take, as they're learning a piece, you can take each phrase and pull it out and practice the rhythm on percussion. You can sing lyrics to the piece while clapping the pulse. And that can be incredibly helpful because it's using the voice, and that helps in oral, which we were discussing last week. We can sing lyrics while clapping the pulse, but also differentiating the beat hierarchy, the first beat and the first beat being the strongest, and other beats in the bar. So I use quick reading as a guide for when we're getting ready to introduce sight reading. If they are learning pieces that are at their current grade level quickly, for instance, I can give them a piece and they can come back in an hour with it learned, then this to me is a good indicator that it's time to pull out some sight reading and start to think about sight reading as its own separate category. And obviously some pieces are very long, and I'm not saying get it exam ready in 1 hour, but to be able to sit down, learn it, and come back and play it reasonably confidently after an hour, that's to me is like, oh yay, things are coming together. And so I promote quick reading with my students, or quick learning. How quick can you learn this piece? Because to me, that is the precursor to good sight reading. And sometimes sight reading just evolves. If we've done step 1A and step 1B, and we've got quick reading happening of their pieces they're learning, sight reading can just sort of evolve. So then what if I teach something like Suzuki method? I teach ear and oral development before eye. So just to explain, if anyone's not familiar with that phrase, ear before eye, that means we're teaching oral, and we're teaching students to figure out pieces by ear before we introduce the notation system. So if using an oral-based approach, I would advise introducing note reading as a theory, as like a theory book, note spelling books, things away from the instrument. So yes, we want them to develop their ear, we want them to develop their technique. We don't want to bring that to the instrument and ruin their technique. So, but if they're learning it as theory, and then, technique isn't involved. And again, we're separating our tasks down so that we're not multitasking. So learning notes as theory is incredibly beneficial. And also the eye is the dominant sense. So if we bring in the eye at the instrument too early in their age bracket, again, this is before 7, if we bring the eye in too early, they actually will stop using their ear. So we don't want that to happen. And that's where doing all this stuff away from the instrument with theory, with percussion, is very beneficial. Once the note reading is strong on paper, it's easy transition to bring flashcards and bring it over to the instrument. Actually, many students who've done well in their theory, and they apply it to their reading music as their own initiative. So I often have a student come who said, I figured out to learn this by reading. And it's because their theory had done it, their brain was cognitively ready, and they just took control of that. So that's an excellent indication that the brain is at the right stage to be reading at the instrument. The issue is if we bring in reading at the instrument before the technique is stable, the same as with sight reading, that the technique can collapse and it becomes harder to focus on. Oops. So what are the disadvantages of sight reading before the student is ready? Well, the main one is anxiety. And the anxiety becomes permanently entrenched with regards to sight reading. It took me years to shake that. Sight reading was something at the end of the lesson, but it was never something I was given skills or preparation to be able to handle. Just thrown the sight reading because it was part of the exam, and I should be able to do it because I have a book, not Paul Harris, but something similar in those days, and you should just be able to do it. So there was this anxiety surrounding it. There's the anxiety that comes to the fact you're only given 30 seconds. But if they're not ready for it, there is going to be an anxiety. If they know that their note reading is slow, or if they're still using every good boy deserves fruit or face, then this anxiety can become quite permanent. And sight reading is difficult if readiness has not been achieved. And we want sight reading to be a positive and an interesting and enjoyable task. So, as I mentioned before, not all children are going to be cognitively ready to sight read when they're ready to do an exam in the other departments of the exam. So, this one size fit approach, all approach is not always the best. So, what resources are there for sight reading? Actually, I'll go back and just say that just because a student might be at grade 6 in playing, grade 3 in oral, and grade 4 in sight reading, and that is okay. And one of the problems with the school system is it has said, oh, everyone who's in year 3 should be at this level in every subject. But a reason I'm very pro homeschooling is that then you can say to a child, okay, you're really good at this subject, off you go. You know, let's delve into that. So my daughter's handwriting is 2 grades below her age. Her reading is high and her music is high, but the handwriting is behind. The reading was very far behind. I actually was worried she'd never learn to read. But we just kept at it, and she's kept progressing, and it's speeding up. But I didn't hold back the other subjects to go, well, your handwriting is bad, so let's not do maths. So her maths is way ahead, and her science is way ahead. And handwriting is still behind, but it's catching up. So, and that is an okay thing to have happen. And it's the same with our music students. But using books in order. So if they're at grade 1 sight reading level, working through grade 1 step by step. It doesn't matter what level the other sections of the exam are. We still want to work step by step through it. So resources for sight reading, and there's lots of resources, but here are my 3 favorites. Paul Harris wrote, and he spoke a few weeks ago, and he did offer to speak again. They improve your sight reading. He's written for almost every instrument, and his approach involves doing rhythm work at the beginning of each week, and it moves very stepwise, introducing keys one at a time and introducing notes ranges one at a time. And he has lots of practice exercises for students to work through, as well as exercises that ask questions about the piece to involve style and phrasing and those sort of elements as well. The ABRSM, of course, has the specimen sight reading textbooks, which have numerous exercises at each grade level. And whether or not you want to do an ABRSM exam, these are useful to have on the shelf to say, well, we're working at about grade 1 level. This is the sight reading that matches that. And then how to blitz sight reading. How to blitz sight reading actually starts with single note sight reading and explores rhythmless sight reading. So I really love that about her book, because I think that just getting that confidence at rhythmless sight reading before adding that extra challenge is so helpful for the kids. Always start sight reading from the beginning. When someone starts out sight reading, whether they're at grade 6, whether they're at grade 1, it doesn't matter. They should always start sight reading at grade 1 or preliminary grade if you're using a syllabus that has, or a book that has preliminary grade. So if they're grade 6, it doesn't hurt to practice sight reading easy stuff and get that confidence at sight reading. Actually, what I've always done with students is when they are doing an exam, I make them sight read from the beginning of grade 1 in the specimen sight reading book all the way through. So I had a book, and I don't think it's available anymore, which was Amy B, preliminary grade through to diploma sight reading. So, okay, start at the beginning of the book, because it was only one book, and just keep working. And so they'd be sight reading easier stuff where they had the freedom, because it was easy to focus on other elements like style and dynamics and phrasing. But they could work their way up gradually, and a form of revision. But always never push a student to read something that is too hard, because if they're not thoroughly prepared, that's when we get issues with anxiety. And kids who say, oh, I'm a bad sight reader, I think I give an opportunity to say, I don't know if I give an opportunity to say, doesn't matter. I spent some time in China, and I remember that because Chinese is not alphabetical. So I do remember that when I arrived in China, I couldn't read. I could speak enough to get by, but I couldn't read. And 2 weeks of being immersed in reading and having, obviously there was Chinese signs everywhere. They actually were translated as well in most cases, but there was Chinese everywhere. And 2 weeks into my stay, I remember turning to my translator and saying, I can read everything. It's like a book has opened up. That feeling of just, oh, wow, I can understand all these signs. And she said to me, oh, the same thing happened to me in school in Australia, where all of a sudden I was struggling, then all of a sudden it just English opened up and I could understand, and I could read easily and I could understand easily. And it's the same with sight reading. It's, yes, it can be that we work step by step, but there's this moment where everything just opens up, and anybody, if they're prepared, can become a good sight reader. The language can just open up. The dog's about to bark. No, phew. Okay. So good, and just to add, like we've talked about sight reading as far as note and rhythm, but good sight reading is more than just the notes. So we want them to master the notes and rhythm elements. We want them to be so natural that then they can start going, oh, what are the dynamics? What is the phrasing? What is the style of this piece? What are the tempo markings? And to be able to do that, they need to be able to multitask. And so each step must be habituated first. So good sight reading puts these elements as priority: the phrasing, the style, the tempo. I was speaking to a student once, not mine, who just got into some audition, some prestigious school, I guess, and he said, oh, I didn't even get the notes right, I won't get in. And he got in, and I reckon the reason he got in was because his phrasing and style was so beautiful that it was a beautiful performance in itself, even if some of the notes were wrong. As long as the pulse is kept going and everything is played beautifully with beautiful tone, then it's a good sight read. It's better, I've said this a few times, but repetition is good for learning. It is better to make a note mistake than to lose the pulse. And I already told this analogy. Imagine if you're playing for a choir and you go, oh, I made a mistake, let me go back. But the choir's kept going. So now we've got more mistakes because we're playing behind the choir. And as I mentioned, in education, whether it's music or otherwise, not all topic or subject areas will be learned at the same rate, and this is okay. We don't need to force our students to be at grade 8 sight reading level because they're playing grade 8 pieces. These skills are individual, they follow their own paths. They're all important, so I'm not saying that they're not important, but they as long as they are learning, when in our country, if you're homeschooling, the government representative comes to check that your kids are progressing, and that's what they're looking for. Are they progressing in each of their subjects? Whether they're ahead or behind, they need to be progressing, and there needs to be a plan in place to help them progress. And it is okay that these are all at different grade levels as far as the school curriculum goes, as long as they're still progressing ahead. So every person can be a good reader. So I don't know if anyone's here because they want to be a good sight reader, but they're not. But every person has the ability. Sight reading is about practice and it's about multitasking. So same as when I was in China, and because I was reading the signs all the time, I was practicing. And so I'm not realizing I was practicing, of course, but that practice over and over and over again makes you a good reader. And continue to sight read at one level until that level is mastered. And this is where things like your AMEB specimen tests, your Trinity specimen tests, and so forth. If you've sight read all the BRSM stuff you can find at grade 1 and you're still not finding that sight reading is easy at that level, get the AMEB book, get the Trinity book, at that same level. So continue at that level until it's mastered. There's no point going to the next level if you're still shaky at the level before. So sight reading is not the same as quick reading, and it's not the same as learning music from the book. But quick reading is an essential skill to develop for learning an instrument. It's much better to be able to learn a piece quickly than to spend six months struggling with it. And once they are quick at reading, this can develop into sight reading. And quick reading is very good for motivation. Sometimes kids get bogged down, they've been on the grade for too long. But if they're quick reading and they're able to learn pieces quickly, and then they can be quick reading other pieces and learning other pieces quickly while they're polishing their exam pieces. And then they get that feeling of progression and not the feeling of being stagnant. So, I said this. So the more things you can find to sight read, the better. And that includes old ABRSM, AMEB books and Trinity books. So as a guideline to go 2 grades below. So if you're doing grade 6, then looking for old books that are grade 4 level are excellent to sight read. 8 Notes and musicnotes.com have a wide range of music that can be sight read, and you can even, it's not quite sight reading, but you can even pick some of the popular music that I detest to sight read. Anything that interests you. The sky is the absolute limit when it comes to what can we find to sight read. And that is the end of the slideshow. So I will stop that. No, I meant to stop share and see if there are any questions in the chat, or if anyone has any questions. I am, well, it's live streamed, so that means it gets saved on Facebook. So absolutely. So does anyone have, wait, I just need to change my view so I can see you all. Does anyone have something they want to add or something they want to ask? You can either add in the chat, or you should be able to unmute. Yes, sure. So there was 2 ones I shared. One was Melody Express, and the link is there. And now that I'm not on the slide, I'll just check my phone messages. It's called modernsuccessfulparenting.com.au and /shop. So maybe I can type it in the chat. So modernsuccessfulparenting.com.au/shop. Oh, but I didn't spell parenting right. So yeah, I've been using these. I'm trying to think how long ago. My eldest son's 15, so maybe 12 years. I stumbled across those cards, and just to be able to play card games was absolute winner. Even for some students who were really struggling with English reading, and I wanted to introduce note reading. And I actually would start with only like 2 notes to start with. Or here's C, which has a sword through its head, and here's D. So they only had 2, and we'd be playing snap with just I know it's not very many cards, but just with 2 notes. And then 3, thank you so much for coming. LYK, lovely to see you here. So yeah, so I absolutely love those cards just because of the game aspect. And then the other one is the Alfred's cards, which have the grade 1 theory sort of extra benefit. So I use those 2. I've used Hal Leonard in the past, but they didn't grab me quite so much. But they do, the Hal Leonard ones have the rhythms on them. Also, the live stream will be on the page, so you can always just fast forward to that part to see the image. I just grabbed the image from Amazon for that one. So yeah, anyone, you're very welcome. Would anyone like to add something to what I've said? Wait, can people unmute? Maybe no one can unmute. Can you unmute? Yes, you can. And silence. Well, maybe the reason there's, oh, you're welcome, Casey. Maybe the reason there's silence is because I've said absolutely everything. Although in the forum, people started talking about the importance of audiation, and to a much greater extent to what I've talked about here. And so it sounded like that the person who was talking, and I've forgotten the name, so if you're listening, I'm very sorry, was saying that they're really focusing on getting them to hear the music orally before they try to start sight reading it. So I think it would be beneficial to have someone who's an expert at sight singing to come as a guest and talk about teaching sight singing. Now, Dixon says, playing in the choir is indeed an excellent exercise for sight reading. Can you share some quick tips? If there is a song change and there is just a couple of minutes to play the hymn. I'm sorry, Dixon, I don't quite understand the question. Yeah, I will tell you though that maybe if you want to rewrite your question or unmute and ask, but I have numerous times been playing, had to play a hymn on the spot and forgotten to check either the key signature or the time signature, which is rather embarrassing, and good example why students must check before they start. And actually in grade 6 violin, I even remember I looked at the notes and I saw that the notes were like F major-y shaped. So I started sight reading in F major, and then I got to some accidental and went, wait a second, like E natural or something, like, wait a second. And then I saw the key signature, I went, oh, it's in F minor. And quick, the second half played in F minor. So, but particularly late nights, you know, at Christmas when they want their 9 p.m. and midnight services, I'm not very good at sight reading at those times of nights, and I was particularly prone to miss those sort of details. So I don't know if that's a quick tip, but that's a warning. Don't forget to check those two details. Jackson, do you want to ask your question? I can't see which one you are on the screen. Do you want to unmute and ask the question? Because I'm not quite sure I understand it.
Yes, exactly. That's what has happened numerous times because of the change in the key. This has happened a lot of times, even when I've played, and some of my students in church, when they try to play, this has happened because usually we are practicing the hymn which is already pre-prepared, which is already told. But sometimes during the service, there's the choir master, you know, he changes the song order or the song who's supposed to play. So it has happened a couple of times. Students have played in the wrong key and the choir had to struggle a bit. So I just wanted to know, are there any quick tips? Like if you're preparing for it, definitely we know the key signature, we know what we need to play if we have time to prepare and practice. But I believe sight reading should be about, you look at the sheet and you can play. I am glad, you know, the rhythm is perfect. There is no issue with the rhythm. The choir also supports the player, but in terms of phrasing, any quick tip that you can give, like what should be the idea if we need to maintain, you know, the perfection on the notes as well? That was my main concern of question.
Yeah, so obviously things like key signature are essential. They're getting a couple of wrong notes, you know, when the choir's singing, they're not going to hear if there's a couple of wrong notes. And even when they're not singing, unless you do something daft, like have the hymn book fall on the keys, which maybe I had happen, they're not going to notice a wrong note, particularly where they in the context of the whole thing. I just had a thought, if they are younger people and this is happening, you could maybe have like a little post-it note on the piano that says, don't forget to check the time signature and the key signature, just to remind them. I don't think there's an easy answer there, but the more times we do it, the easier.
Exactly.
we get
That's
at it.
that's not an easy answer. I completely get that, and that's why constant practice, regular intervention, and constant practice is, I guess, the best way to get there.
Mm. And it can be
But thank you
really,
for
it can be daunting having to accompany church or a choir in the beginning in a different way to an exam. But I always remind students, you know, they're all too interested in singing, or they're too interested in praying, and they're not really going to notice if you do something wrong. Unless, of course, you drop the hymn on the hymn book on the pipe organ, and it goes down 3 manuals and onto the pedal board. Then they notice.
yeah,
Just
not
as long as you
that.
don't drop the hymn book, you're probably going to be okay. But yeah, they're getting the
Thank you
time
so much.
signatures wrong. I think the trick is, if you get the key signature wrong, the
Yeah,
moment they start singing, you realize and you quickly adjust it. So maybe they had trouble hearing the introduction. The other thing is, of course, it is in that situation, such as church, you can stop and say, "I'm so sorry, I had the wrong key signature,"
yeah.
and nobody's even going to remember it by the end of the service anyway.
Yeah.
Depending on the type of church, I guess some places are too formal for that to happen. But I've stopped before and said, "I'm so sorry, I misread the start of that," and started again.
Yeah, anyways, thank you so much for the wonderful session.
Yeah, thanks for
Looking forward to
coming.
joining. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, for those who just joined, I realize the clocks have just changed, which always makes the Zoom awkward. I sort of wasn't even sure if anyone would come today because a whole heap of people showed up an hour ago. But this is now the same time for the next 4 or 5 months. So I think it's 12 noon in the UK, and it's 9 p.m. in Sydney. So yeah, so anyone's welcome every week, and it will start at the same time until the clocks start changing for the next change of season. So if there's no more questions, I might finish it there. Thank you everyone for coming. It's been lovely to see everyone, and lovely to see some new faces or new names and new piece of cake there. And of course, welcome to my old friends who've been Casey and WK, who've been here very regularly. I'm glad you got the time zone change correct.